Welcome, curious minds, to the deep dive. Today we're embarking on a journey that, honestly, might just reshape how you see the world and its history. Imagine just for a second seeing maps where Europe isn't the center, maybe not even easily recognizable.
Right.
Picture the Hereford Mapamundi. It's got Jerusalem right there, bang in the middle. Or old Arab charts focused on the Caspian Sea. Or a medieval Turkish map centered on a city most of us have never heard of, Balasagun.
It's a powerful thought, isn't it? That feeling when you realize just how much history, how many different viewpoints were either, well, deliberately lost or maybe just ignored.
Exactly, because we've all been taught this very specific story, often with Europe as the main character, the inevitable winner.
That rise of Europe narrative, it became this insistent story, as our sources put it, that sort of drowned out everything else. But what if, for thousands of years, the real action, the globe's true axis, was somewhere else entirely?
What if those regions we barely learned about were actually the heart of it all?
Precisely.
And that's exactly what we're diving into today, this huge dynamic region between East and West, what we call the Silk Roads. We're going to unpack how this area was the planet's pivot point for centuries.
We'll look at its ancient empires, the incredible flow of goods, ideas, religions.
And how its kind of historical importance is making a comeback now in ways that are really shaping our world today. So, yeah, get ready to maybe reconsider a few things.
Okay, so to really get this, we first need to, adjust our historical compass. Western history, for a long time, put Europe front and center. But the sources we're looking at suggest this was, well, a constructed narrative.
Right, it was about asserting dominance. History itself was, you could say, twisted and manipulated while Europe was rising. They used classical styles, Roman imagery, all that stuff.
To make it seem natural, like a direct line from ancient glory.
Exactly, to make Western dominance feel natural and inevitable. And that narrative effectively suffocated, pushed aside the stories of other incredibly vibrant regions. But those other maps you mentioned,
they're like these snapshots of different realities, worldviews centered on Jerusalem or the Caspian or Balasagun, places where Europe was, frankly, often on the edge.
It's a total shift in perspective, because for millennia, the real axis, the place where everything connected, was this massive region linking Europe and the Pacific.
Think about the sheer scale of it, the intellectual energy, the architecture in cities like Constantinople, Damascus, Samarkand, Kashgar.
These were huge centers of culture and learning, home to scholars like Ibn Sina Avicenna in the West, a giant in medicine philosophy, centuries before Europe's Renaissance.
Absolutely, giants whose work laid foundations we still build on.
And out of this crucible of the Silk Roads, emerged these massive ancient empires. They really set the stage for global interaction. Let's start with Persia.
Okay, the Persian Empire. Exploding out of southern Iran, 6th century BC. Pretty soon, they dominate everything from the Aegean Sea, practically, to the Himalayas. What's really interesting, though, is what Herodotus noted, their openness. They weren't afraid to adopt foreign customs, fashions. That flexibility must have been key.
Right, to managing such a diverse empire. But they also had challenges, didn't they, those steppe nomads?
Oh, absolutely. A constant threat. Fierce warriors. The sources mention some pretty intense descriptions, drinking enemies' blood, making clothes from scalps.
Yikes. Sounds almost mythological.
Yeah.
How did Persia handle these groups who sound so terrifying?
Well, it was a mix. Constant, brutal fighting on the frontiers. Cyrus the Great himself apparently died trying to subdue the Scythians. But, and this is crucial, it wasn't just conflict.
Okay.
These nomads were also essential trading partners, especially for horses, really high-quality horses needed for the Persian military. So it was this complex dance of war and trade, high stakes.
Makes sense. Then, after Persia, you get Alexander the Great. Just sweeps in, smashes armies, takes over Persia's royal road, the communication networks.
The speed was incredible, but what often gets sort of glossed over, much more often ignored, as one source says, is the legacy.
Beyond just conquest.
Yeah. The blending, Hellenization, they call it. You get Greek, Persian, Indian, Central Asian influences all mixing. You see it in coins, standardized coins with Greek letters and images popping up everywhere, new art forms, new ideas. It was profound.
And that interconnectedness just keeps growing, right?
Yeah.
China gets pulled in more deeply.
Definitely. The Han Dynasty needed resources, especially horses. Top quality horses from places like Xinjiang, out west.
For their military. Against nomadic groups.
Exactly, fighting groups like the Xiongnu. So this demand for horses pushed China's connections further and further across Asia.
And that brings us to the commodity that really defined this era, didn't it? Silk. the start of a truly global economy. Silk, it wasn't just fancy cloth. It was like an economic superpower back then.
Absolutely. Under the Han Dynasty, it was basically currency. They paid soldiers with it, especially way out on the frontiers where coins were heavy and maybe not even useful, and grain just rotted.
Wow. So actual bolts of silk as payment.
Yeah. And fines could be paid in silk. It became this international medium of exchange way beyond just being a luxury good, and the demand in the West. Huge.
Reaching elites in Carthage, Rome.
But Rome had a complicated relationship with it.
Oh, yeah, moral outrage. Seneca, the philosopher, he was appalled, called it thin flowing material, basically saying it was indecent, revealed too much of the female form.
So scandalous.
He saw it as a cipher for exoticism and eroticism, undermining Roman values, marital relations, all that. They even tried repeatedly to ban men from wearing it.
Oh.
Didn't really work, though.
Huh. It just shows the power of these imported goods, challenging norms even back then.
It's incredible, really. 2,000 years ago, what people wanted to buy, the styles they liked, were being shaped by things made thousands of miles away. Talk about the deep roots of globalization.
And just like goods traveled, so did ideas, faiths. The Silk Roads weren't just about trade. They were these incredibly vibrant, sometimes chaotic, intellectual and theological spaces. A real crossroads of faiths. You had gods, cults, major religions, all interacting, blending, competing, sometimes clashing. Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, Zoroastrianism, Manichaeism, Judaism, Christianity, Islam. It was crowded.
Why did they spread so effectively along these routes? Was it just merchants carrying ideas?
That was part of it, sure. But religious success was often tied up with, well, power. Military victories, cultural prestige. Winning converts wasn't just about good arguments. It was often linked to which group was dominant.
Let's take Buddhism. How did that travel east so successfully?
One key idea was endowments. The belief that if you were generous, donated to monasteries, supported monks, you'd be rewarded, carried over the oceans of sufferings, as one text puts it. That was a powerful motivator.
So spiritual and practical benefits.
Right, and it spread up through the Pamir Mountains into China. You get these amazing sacred sites popping up, like the Quidal Caves in Xinjiang, cities like Kashgar and Turfan, becoming major Buddhist centers.
And it competed with existing beliefs.
Oh, definitely. In China, it was in constant dialogue, sometimes competition with traditional Confucianism. Some rulers, like the Northern Wei dynasty, actively promoted Buddhism, built huge statues, lavish monasteries.
Why? To legitimize their rule?
Pretty much, to show they had divine backing. Meanwhile, you also had early Christian communities spreading east into the Caucasus, the Persian Gulf, even as far as modern Afghanistan.
But then you get this interesting twist with Christianity and Constantine.
Ah, yes. The irony. Constantine embraces Christianity in Rome, setting the stage for Christian Europe. But that very act spectacularly compromised Christianity's future in the East.
How so?
Because Persia, Rome's big rival, suddenly saw Christians within its borders as potential traitors, a fifth column loyal to the Roman emperor.
Ah, so association with the enemy.
Exactly. Shah Shapur II launched fierce persecutions. Bishops, priests martyred. It made Christianity politically toxic in Persia, really hindering its spread eastward just as it was taking off westward.
Yet eventually, Rome and Persia kind of buried the hatchet, didn't they?
Yeah.
Facing common threats.
Yeah. When new dangers emerged from the steppes, old enemies sometimes found common ground. But those same routes that carried faiths also carried devastation. Plague, invasions. They could shift power dynamics dramatically.
Like the Justinianic plague, 541 AD. That sounds terrifying.
It was apocalyptic. Sources say it moved like lightning, thousands dying daily in Constantinople alone. It ripped through Persian cities, reached China, spread along those very trade networks. The scale is hard to grasp.
And then the Huns. They arrived around 350 AD.
Yeah, migrating west, possibly due to climate change, resource competition on the steppes. They hit the Roman frontier hard. Emperor Valens defeated, Rome itself eventually sacked. And their appearance.
You mentioned that earlier, the pointed heads.
Yeah, artificial cranial deformation. They deliberately shaped their infants' skulls. It must have added to the terror. They didn't just fight differently, they looked alien, menacing.
Chilling.
Yeah.
Fast forward a few centuries, 14th century, the Black Death, also from the steppes.
And this is where we get that truly grim detail. The Mongols besieging the Genoese trading post at Kaffa in the Crimea.
What did they do?
Biological warfare. They started catapulting corpses infected with the plague over the walls and into the city. 1346. Just horrific.
Unbelievable. What were the long-term effects of something that catastrophic, beyond the immediate horror?
Well, the Black Death wiped out huge percentages of the population in Europe and the Muslim world. Responses varied: fasting, prayer, flagellation. But strangely, in some places like London, the survivors actually saw improvements later on.
Improvements. How?
Fewer people meant labor was more valuable, less competition for land and resources. Wages went up in some areas. It sounds strange, but some historians argue it led to better health, longer life expectancy for those who survived, and even spurred economic shifts, especially in Northern Europe. It was a massive, brutal reset.
So a grim paradox. Utter devastation clearing the way for unexpected changes, maybe even contributing to shifts that would eventually favor Europe. Okay, so the world is reeling from plague, empires are unstable, and into this turmoil, a new powerful force emerges: Islam.
Right. It arrives amidst that post-plague stagnation, Roman decline. Prophet Muhammad's message offered powerful, bold, and coherent explanations for all this upheaval, and promises to spiritual rewards, paradise, but also potentially economic benefits.
And his approach to other faiths.
Initially, quite conciliatory, actually. Sources mention mutual defense agreements with Jewish tribes in Medina, finding common ground with the Old Testament, and a sense of shared heritage with Christians' common prophets' rejection of polytheism.
The expansion was incredibly fast, wasn't it?
Astonishingly swift. Arab armies spread out, conquering vast territories. Tax revenues tripled in some areas, like Egypt, after Alexandria was demilitarized in exchange for tribute.
And this fueled a new golden age.
An age of incredible scholarship, definitely. Centers like Baghdad, Bukhara, Merv became hubs of learning, translating texts Greek, Persian, Syriac into Arabic. This wasn't just preservation, it was the foundation for new research, new discovery.
Commercially, too.
Oh, absolutely. The Uyghurs rose to prominence in the Eastern Silk Road trade. Cities like Merv were booming, called the Mother of the World. Huge horse breeding operations on the steppes, expanding agriculture, even a thriving fur road catering to Muslim demand.
And you mentioned the Khazars earlier, their conversion.
Yeah, a really unique story. Major allies of Byzantium, a powerful steppe empire. And their leader, the Kagan, decides to convert. The story goes he holds this debate, invites representatives from Islam, Christianity, and Judaism to make their case.
A religious bake-off.
Sort of. And apparently he asks the Christians and Muslims which of the other two faiths is closer to the truth. When they both grudgingly admit Judaism has the older claim, tracing back to Abraham, he chooses Judaism. Quite shrewd if the story is true. Their capital, Atil, became this cosmopolitan hub with separate courts for different religious laws.
Meanwhile, further north, the Vikings are getting involved.
The rest is, yeah. They adapted their longships for rivers, sailed down into the Black Sea, Caspian Sea, traded heavily with the Muslim world. What did they trade? Furs, definitely. And grimly, slaves captured further north. They even raided and sacked the Khazar capital, Atil, at one point.
And this interaction had ripples even in Western Europe.
Surprisingly, yes. Remember King Offa of Mercia in Anglo-Saxon England? He minted gold coins that were direct copies of Islamic dinars, complete with Arabic script, probably didn't even know what it said, just that it represented wealth and prestige.
Wow.
And huge amounts of Islamic silver flowed into Europe via these trade routes, especially through the Vikings. Some argue this influx of silver actually galvanized European economies, helping pull them out of the so-called Dark Ages. It really shows how interconnected everything was.
So this vast network is buzzing with trade, ideas, faith, but also conflict. And the Crusades really highlight that power struggle aspect.
Definitely. Pope Urban II calls for the First Crusade, but the Crusaders, once they get to the east, they're relatively weak, militarily speaking, compared to local powers.
So they needed help.
They needed ships, supplies, money, which led them to make deals with the rising Italian city-states, Pisa, Genoa, Venice. These deals basically turned these cities into international maritime powers. They got huge trading privileges in Crusader ports.
That created rivalry between them.
Oh, intense rivalry. Running battles in the streets of Constantinople, fierce competition for trade routes. It was cutthroat. We actually have the Genoese rivalry with Venice to thank indirectly for Marco Polo's book.
How so?
He was captured by the Genoese during a sea battle against Venice and dictated his travel memoirs while in prison in Genoa. It speaks volumes about the brutality and relentless focus of these city-states.
And then the Fourth Crusade, That one went off the rails, didn't it?
Completely. 1204, the Venetians basically hijacked the crusade. Instead of going to Egypt or the Holy Land, they persuade the Crusaders to attack Constantinople, their Christian Byzantine rivals. They used doctrinal differences as a flimsy excuse, calling the Orthodox Byzantines worse than the Jews.
But the real goal was
Money and power. Seizing control of Constantinople gave Venice direct access to Black Sea trade routes, cutting out rivals. It was a brutal power grab disguised as religious fervor.
But the Crusader states didn't last forever. Saladin emerges.
Yes, Saladin. A brilliant Kurdish leader who united Muslim forces. His decisive victory at the Horns of Hattin in 1187 shattered the main Crusader army. He executed the Knights Templar and Hospitaller and personally beheaded Reynold of Chatillon, a notoriously troublesome Crusader lord.
But when he took Jerusalem,
it was remarkably peaceful, especially compared to the Crusaders' bloody conquest a century earlier. He accepted the city's surrender, allowed many inhabitants to ransom themselves, a different approach.
while all this is happening in the Near East, another power is rising, the Mongols.
The Mongol ascendancy. Unbelievably fast conquests across China, Central Asia, Persia, Russia. They were fearsome, yes, but the picture is a bit more nuanced. Sometimes they invested heavily in rebuilding cities they'd conquered, like Samarkand, boosting infrastructure.
Why didn't they conquer Western Europe? They seemed unstoppable.
Europe basically got lucky. The great Khan Ogedei died back in Mongolia in 1241. Mongol tradition required all senior commanders, including those leading the invasion of Europe, to return home for the election of a successor, the Kurultai.
Ah, so internal politics saved Europe.
Pretty much. There was no such thing as primogeniture, no automatic eldest son inheritance, so everyone had to go back to jockey for position. That pause gave Europe a crucial breather. It's one of history's great what-ifs.
And the Mongols facilitated even more exchange, right?
Absolutely. Despite the violence, their unified empire made travel across Eurasia safer for a time. You get figures like Rabban Samuma, a Uyghur Christian bishop, traveling all the way from Mongol-controlled Persia to Europe, trying to forge an anti-Muslim alliance.
And culturally.
Huge impact. New court rituals in India involving ornate saddles came from the steppes. Culinary habits changed in China, more boiling of food, using the whole animal carcass, influenced by Mongol practices. Kublai Khan's diet of fermented milk and horse meat became known. It was truly globalization's first major wave, complex and often brutal.
Okay, so we're moving into the 15th century, and the world is really starting to look more like the one we know, with globalization kicking into high gear. China first. Xing, his voyages.
Yeah, early 15th century, these were massive expeditions, huge treasure ships, dozens of them, tens of thousands of sailors, a real display of Chinese naval power and state-funded enterprise, a command economy flexing its muscles.
But their view of the outside world was still limited.
Surprisingly, yes. Even a couple of centuries earlier, Chinese knowledge was distinctly sketchy, filled with inaccuracies and semi-mystical beliefs, like thinking Mecca was Buddha's birthplace, or that Spain had 6-foot-long melons.
Okay, so contrast that with Europe, particularly Portugal and Spain.
They're pushing out into the Atlantic, Portugal down the coast of Africa. Christopher Columbus actually used his experiences on those Portuguese voyages to estimate the Earth's size for his own westward trip.
And then 1492.
Columbus. He lands in the Americas, convinced he's found India beyond the Ganges. He reports back about limitless fertile lands, spices, gold, pearls, all obtainable for trifles like bells, mirrors, glass beads.
And the Europeans had a key advantage.
Technology, especially military tech, their instruments of death cannons, firearms honed by centuries of near-constant warfare in Europe. This gave them a massive edge against many societies they encountered.
Fueling Spain's golden age.
The Era Dorada, yeah, fueled by the seemingly endless silver and gold flowing back across the Atlantic. But this also immediately kicked off the transatlantic slave trade.
How quickly did that start?
Almost instantly. Slaves were being imported to the Americas from Portuguese markets in Africa very early on. The incentives were brutal. In places like São Tomé, off Africa, orphans and convicts sent there were even given a slave for personal service.
And England got involved, too.
Oh, yes. Figures like Sir John Hawkins made fortunes shipping enslaved people. Even Queen Elizabeth I invested in his voyages. It was seen as highly profitable.
Meanwhile, Portugal finds the direct sea route to Asia.
Vasco da Gama, 1498, reaches India. His mission was partly religious proclaimed Christianity, seize kingdoms from Muslims, but also, crucially, about getting those riches of the East directly, bypassing the old land routes and the Venetian Muslim middlemen.
So they set up bases?
Exactly. A strategic network, Jeddah, Muscat, Goa, aiming to control the Indian Ocean trade, essentially creating a maritime monopoly. Though, interestingly, after some initial swaggering violence, they often shifted to a more pragmatic approach in Asia.
How so? Different from the Americas.
Yes. In Asia, they often found it more effective to cooperate with local rulers for commercial gain rather than outright conquests like the Spanish in the Americas. It was more about controlling trade networks than vast territories initially.
And Britain starts making its move.
Yeah, especially after the Ming Dynasty in China lifted some trade restrictions in the 1680s. Suddenly, there's this surge in demand for Chinese tea, porcelain, sugar, and European traders realized China valued silver much more highly relative to gold than Europe did.
Arbitrage opportunity.
Exactly. Huge profits to be made shipping silver east. Britain was also playing smart diplomacy, getting more generous privileges in the Ottoman Empire than other European powers. They even found common language with Muslims, Queen Elizabeth, and Sultan Murad, emphasizing shared anti-idolatry views against Catholic Spain.
Using Spain as a foil.
Definitely. Portraying the Spanish Empire as tyrannical and built on slavery helped justify England's own ambitions, even while figures like Hawkins were deep in the slave trade themselves. England was also undergoing a maritime revolution.
Driven by
Constant warfare, leading to specialized warships, better tactics. Admiral Blake's fighting instructions were key, and surprisingly, a drop in combat fatalities because ships got better at disabling rather than just sinking each other.
and the East India Company.
They muscled their way in, displacing the Portuguese in many areas, setting up key centers like Madras, Bombay, Calcutta. They got great tax breaks, favorable terms. Britain's position, that distant, isolated island, ironically became a huge advantage. Combined with less social inequality than some rivals and a growing culture of innovation, they were set to become a dominant global power. The economic center was definitely shifting west.
So Europe's rise casts a long shadow. And those Silk Road regions, they become arenas for new imperial clashes. The Great Game between Britain and Russia is a prime example.
Absolutely. 19th century, Russia, once seen as ramshackle, transforms into this ambitious empire pushing south and east into Central Asia. They used a mix of force and incentives rewards, tax breaks for local elites who cooperated, a reasonably soft touch sometimes, but relentless expansion.
And they saw Asia as their destiny.
Some definitely did. Dostoevsky wrote this provocative essay, What is Asia to Us?, basically arguing Russia could be masters in Asia, free from European constraints. This expansionism led to devastating wars with Persia.
Right, Persia lost huge territories.
Massive territories in the Caucasus, forced to pay huge sums, even needed the Tsar's approval for royal succession. Persia was really weakened. And Britain watched all this with growing anxiety.
The Great Game. Fear for India.
That was the core fear. Britain sent missions to places like Bukhara and Afghanistan, trying to block Russian influence, mostly failures. Meanwhile, Russian strategists like Ignatiev were blunt. Find river routes to India, make alliances, stir up anti-British feelings.
The tensions were high.
Extremely high. Talk of war in Britain, Disraeli rattling sabers. Britain invaded Afghanistan twice. They tried courting Persia. It was a constant struggle for influence across this vast region.
And this rivalry had consequences beyond Central Asia.
Huge consequences. These tensions, especially Russia's ambitions towards the Ottoman Straits and Constantinople, and Germany's rising industrial and military power, pushed France and Russia into an alliance specifically targeting Germany, and by extension, Britain.
Laying the groundwork for WWI alliances.
Precisely. Russia was deeply worried about German influence in the Ottoman military and terrified by the prospect of new British-built battleships arriving for the Turkish Navy, which would give them six-fold superiority in the Black Sea. So the seeds of World War I, you could argue, were sown partly in these struggles thousands of miles away, leading to the fossilization of alliances in Europe.
And then comes oil. The game changes again.
Completely. William Knox Darcy. He gets this huge oil concession from Persia in 1901. Persia was broke, desperate for cash. Meanwhile, in Britain, you have Sir John Fisher at the Admiralty.
The Wake Up England, eh?
That's him. He had this almost evangelical belief that the future of naval power was oil, not coal. Speed, range. It was crucial.
But Darcy almost failed.
Nearly bankrupt. They were literally weeks away from abandoning the search in 1908 when, boom, they struck oil. A massive discovery.
And the British government saw the strategic value immediately.
Instantly. 1913, the government takes a controlling stake in Darcy's company, renamed Anglo-Persian Oil. Churchill made the case powerfully in Parliament. Oil was essential for everything. Corn, cotton, national security.
Giving them a guaranteed supply.
A secret 20-year supply deal for the Navy. It gave British ships a critical edge in speed and range during WWI. Lord Curzon wasn't exaggerating much when he said the Allied cause had floated to victory upon a wave of oil.
So oil directly influenced WWI's strategy and outcomes and the post-war map.
Absolutely. The plans to carve up the Ottoman Empire after the war, driven by dividing resources, especially securing oil for Britain, France, and others. An oil concession for Mesopotamia, what became Iraq, was actually approved the same day Archduke Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. Talk about timing.
Wow.
And Britain then essentially forged Iraq. They lumped together 3 diverse Ottoman provinces: Basra, Baghdad, Mosul, primarily because that area contained the known and suspected oil fields. They installed a Sunni king, Faisal, over a largely Shia population, and kept control through devolved imperial rule to save costs. It was all about the oil.
And in Persia, later Iran.
They backed Reza Khan's rise to power, saw him as someone they could do business with, maybe a bit ignorant, but controllable. And Western oil companies got very good at minimizing royalty payments.
How?
Dexterous and highly creative accounting, as one source puts it, using complex webs of subsidiary companies to shuffle profits and losses around, ensuring the host country saw minimal returns. Led to angry reports in Persian newspapers, obviously. The seeds of future conflict were well and truly sown.
And these dynamics, oil, strategic location, external interference, just intensified during the Cold War, didn't they? The Silk Road region remained a critical chessboard.
Absolutely. Even during World War II, you see it. The Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact wasn't just about Poland. Stalin supplied Hitler with crucial resources from the Soviet Union. The Allies seriously considered bombing Soviet oil fields in Baku to cripple Germany.
And the Nazis had plans for the region.
Ah, yes. Herbert Back's Hunger Plan involved invading Ukraine and the Caucasus specifically for grain and oil, aiming to make Germany self-sufficient and invincible. Even the battle for Stalingrad, while an industrial center, was strategically vital, partly because it protected the flank of the planned German advance towards Caucasus oil.
And Britain's actions in Iran during WWII.
They forced Reza Khan, the Shah they'd previously supported, to abdicate in 1941. Why? Fear he might side with Hitler and the absolute need to secure Iranian oil fields for the Allied war effort. They put his young son, Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, on the throne. It's also chillingly noted that the final solution, the mass murder of Jews, was facilitated partly by resource scarcity concerns within the Nazi regime. Gathering people in camps made killing them systematically easier as resources tightened. Grim logic.
After WWII, the old European powers decline, and the U.S. steps in.
A huge power vacuum. Britain couldn't afford to prop up regimes anymore. The U.S. saw Soviet expansionism as a major threat, and places like Iran, with its strategic location and great oil reserves, became vital.
Leading to the 1953 coup.
Exactly. Iran's Prime Minister Mossadegh nationalized the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company. The CIA, with British help, orchestrates a coup, overthrows Mossadegh, reinstates the Shah, and then pressures American oil companies to form a consortium to take over most of the British interests. Iran becomes a key American client state.
Then Suez, 1956. Nasser nationalizes the canal.
A turning point. Britain, France, and Israel invade. It backfires spectacularly, becomes a propaganda disaster. The U.S. forces them to withdraw. Eisenhower basically had to choose, support his old European allies or side with the rising tide of nationalism in the oil-rich world of the Middle East.
He chose the Middle East.
He chose oil and influence in the Middle East. This fueled domino effect, fears Nasser's success, inspired others. A coup in Iraq in 1958 overthrew the pro-Western monarchy. So the U.S. doubled down on supporting strongmen seen as anti-Soviet, like General Ayub Khan in Pakistan, giving him advanced weapons despite his imposing martial law. And don't forget, the Soviets built their main rocket launch site, Baikonur, right there in Kazakhstan in 1955. Huge strategic implications for the Cold War arms race.
But local forces were pushing back too.
Definitely. Discontent simmered in Iran against the Shah's regime, the corruption, the repression, the closeness to the U.S. Ayatollah Khomeini masterfully tapped into this, gaining support from secular nationalists, leftists, and religious conservatives, all united in wanting the Shah gone.
And OPEC flexing its muscles.
OPEC, formed in 1960, was a deliberate attempt to curtail the influence of the West. A spiritual protege, you could say, of figures like Mossadegh and Nasser, and in the 1970s, they made their move.
The oil shocks.
Prices quadrupled almost overnight after the 1973 Yom Kippur War. Iran's revenues went up 8-fold in a single year. Suddenly, these oil-producing nations had immense wealth and leverage. Nixon was urging Americans to lower their thermostats.
And nuclear ambitions start creeping in.
Under the Shah, Iran was already planning nuclear reactors, reprocessing facilities. He openly stated they'd develop weapons if others in the region did. Israel, deeply concerned, had likely developed its own arsenal by '73. Even U.S. officials like Kissinger reportedly got wary, calling the scale of the Shah's plans a fraud.
Then, 1979, revolution in Iran.
Khomeini takes over swiftly. The U.S. embassy is seized, hostages taken, classified documents shredded, but many were painstakingly pieced back together. The Soviets apparently got manuals for advanced U.S. military hardware, like the F-14 Tomcat fighters, sold to the Shah a huge intelligence coup and embarrassing loss.
And the Soviets invade Afghanistan that same year.
To prop up a friendly socialist government there, the U.S. feared another domino falling after the Shah. Carter imposed an oil embargo on Iran, froze assets. The failed U.S. hostage rescue mission just highlighted America's perceived weakness.
Then the Iran-Iraq War. Saddam Hussein attacks Iran.
1980. Initially, the U.S. saw Saddam's attack as maybe helpful, a blessing even, hoping it would pressure Iran to release the hostages. It gets incredibly messy.
Didn't Iran and Israel cooperate at one point?
Briefly, yes.
Yeah.
Both saw Saddam's nuclear program as a threat. Israel bombed Iraq's Osirak reactor in 1981, likely with some degree of Iranian logistical help or intelligence sharing. Strange bedfellows.
But as Iran pushed back Iraq, the U.S. switched sides.
Iran started talking about exporting its Islamic revolution. That worried the U.S. and Gulf states. So Washington began tilting towards Iraq, providing intelligence, credits, and crucially, turning a blind eye or playing down Saddam's widespread, almost daily use of chemical weapons against Iranian troops and Iraqi Kurds.
Leading eventually to Irangate.
The scandal where the U.S. secretly sold arms to Iran to get hostages released from Lebanon, diverting profits to Nicaraguan Contras. This made Saddam deeply distrustful of the U.S., feeling betrayed. Ironically, the U.S. then gave Iraq large loans just before he invaded Kuwait, a real tangled web.
Which brings us to the Gulf War, Afghanistan, Iraq again.
Saddam invaded Kuwait in 1990, partly framing it as self-defense after Irangate. Then the U.S. concerns about Afghanistan becoming a hotbed for militants under the Taliban, hosting Osama bin Laden. The Taliban's response to extradition requests was nuanced, citing traditions of asylum.
And the 2003 Iraq invasion.
Based on claims of WMDs that turned out to be non-existent, famously dismissed later as possibly related to weather balloons, the whole period caused immense reputational damage to the West Guantanamo, torture revelations, drone strikes, manipulated intelligence, tight media control, evoking uncomfortable comparisons to Soviet-style commissars for some critics.
And threats against Iran's nuclear program continue even now.
Yes, U.S. leaders repeatedly state the military option is ready. The echoes of these long struggles over resources and influence are still very loud today.
Which brings us right up to the present day. And looking at this vast region, now Turkey searching for its identity, Ukraine torn apart, Syria transformed, instability in the Caucasus, Kyrgyzstan's tulip revolution, it feels like turmoil, doesn't it?
It absolutely looks like turmoil, but maybe, as our sources suggest, these are the birthing pains of a region reasserting itself.
Birthing pains.
The pains of a region that, for millennia, dominated the intellectual, cultural, and economic landscape and is now, in many ways, re-emerging. Consider Xinjiang in western China.
Yeah, what's happening there?
Increasing hostility from the Uyghur population, reported terrorist attacks, met with controversial state measures banning long beards, discouraging veils through things like Project Beauty. It's tense. But it's happening right along the old Silk Road routes. The argument is we're seeing the world's center of gravity shifting back to where it lay for millennia.
And the engine driving this shift?
Primarily natural resources, oil and gas mainly. The stakes are greater than ever. Just look at the Caspian Sea Basin proven crude reserves estimated to be nearly double those of the entire United States.
Wow. Any specific examples?
Huge fields like Tak-Tak in Iraqi Kurdistan or the massive Karachaganak reserves straddling Kazakhstan and Russia, enormous amounts of natural gas and oil condensate. This wealth is reshaping geopolitics.
Through infrastructure?
Pipelines, absolutely. They're the new Silk Roads, in a way. China signing that massive $400 billion deal to buy Russian gas for 30 years. That gives Beijing huge energy security, and it gives Moscow freedom and additional confidence in its foreign policy, maybe lessening the impact of Western sanctions over things like the Ukraine crisis.
And physical transport links, too. Railways.
Dramatically expanding. There's already the Yuxinu Railway, 7,000 miles from Chongqing in China all the way to Duisburg in Germany. It takes about 16 days. Millions of laptops, shoes, car parts moving along that route.
And more planned.
Oh, yeah. New lines planned through Iran, Turkey, the Balkans. Lines across Siberia. Projects linking Beijing to Pakistan, Kazakhstan to India. There's even serious talk long-term of a 200-mile tunnel under the Bering Strait to connect Asia to North America.
Incredible ambition.
It signals a massive reorientation. The world's center is shifting eastward, back towards these ancient hubs.
So the final thought for everyone listening, this isn't just digging up old history, is
Not
it?
at all. It's about understanding the deep currents shaping our world right now and into the future.
So the question for you for all of this is, as these Silk Roads rise again, as the world recenters, how do we adjust our perspective? What does this mean for global power, for economics, for culture in the 21st century? And how will the West, accustomed to being at the center for so long, navigate this changing world?
It's a profound shift, and understanding its roots, its history, is probably the first step in figuring out where we're all heading.
Definitely something to keep thinking about.